Chapter 1. Journal, October 1998. British Airways Flight 0342 from London Heathrow Airport banked steeply across the Mediterranean Sea, then levelled for its approach to Nice Airport. A flight attendant tapped Ray on the shoulder to waken him, requesting that he fasten his seatbelt. The aircraft would soon be coming into land. The journey had begun in Wellington, New Zealand, almost 30 hours before, on a flight bound for Auckland. From there, Ray transferred from the domestic to the international terminal for his connecting flight to Los Angeles, where he met up with William Shatner in the Air New Zealand First Class Lounge. They were both due to attend the MIPCOM television festival in Cannes, in the south of France, for the launch of Cloud9's latest production, William Shatner's A Twist in the Tale. William had agreed to appear at a press conference which was scheduled for Tuesday, the third day into the festival, so he had some free time to allow for a short break in London with his wife. Ray had no option but to continue on to Cannes, as he needed to brief his Cumulus distribution team before MIPCOM got fully underway. It would be a very busy few days. His assistant had arranged appointments with buyers every 30 minutes on the distribution stand, in addition to breakfast, meetings, luncheons, and dinners with key broadcasters and press. There would be no room to go over the finer details with William when he was due to arrive, so it made sense to utilize part of the 12-hour flight from Los Angeles to London. After dinner, the lights in the cabin dimmed. Before long, most of the passengers were asleep. But Ray's body clock was all over the place. He'd managed to get a few hours rest over the Pacific on the initial leg of the journey, but now felt totally alert and tried to work out what time it might be in New Zealand. He thought it was about 2 p.m. in the afternoon, but after a few glasses of fine red wine with his meal, along with a jet-lagged haze, Ray was having difficulty in deciphering if it was 2 p.m. tomorrow, today, or yesterday, a price he had to pay, being based in the Southern Hemisphere. He smiled to himself at the irony that he was travelling with a companion from the Starship Enterprise, known to many millions around the world for exploring future undiscovered galaxies. Now Ray was also living in the future, though usually no more than 13 hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time. Whatever time it was, Ray decided to try and maximize every spare hour available. So he switched on the seat light to illuminate a pad of paper while he made some notes to record thoughts and ideas he had on some possible storylines for his next project, which was in production, an exciting concept of a world with no adults, which he had tentatively given a working title, Keeping the Dream Alive. Filming had commenced 6 weeks earlier at the Cloud9 Production Centre in New Zealand, but the last block of scripts hadn't been written yet, so it was still possible to alter direction if needs be. For whatever reason, be it logistical or fiscal restraints, as well as any creative reasons, it was always an organic process, but the key was to ensure that there was enough lead-in time for any changes to be implemented. There was a window to revise the scripts delivered to date, and which hadn't been shot, so alterations could still be made to reflect and match the individual qualities of the actors and actresses he had cast. The written word was so different to the spoken word. Often dialogue which worked in a script didn't quite flow when spoken, and similarly, questionable lines in script sometimes just came alive when played out in the scene. From the initial read-throughs, rehearsals, and first few episodes which had been filmed, Ray was becoming more in tune of what was working and what was not. It had nothing to do with the quality of any of the scripts, which were all in very strong shape, nor the talent of the cast. Ray was impressed by all the performances to date. It was more about comfort zones. Although the job of an actor or actress is to interpret a script, Ray was aware that the young cast were all of an age that it would never take long to identify if they struggled with anything which didn't quite ring true when delivering the lines and formulating all the aspects of a character. The Tribe needed to have street cred if it had any hope of resonating with its intended audience demographic. Ray hoped all would go well back in the studio while he was away, especially that everyone was continuing to settle in. It was a tough schedule, 52 episodes in 6 months, with a further 6 months of post-production when all the music and sound effects would be added. The young cast were not only around the same age as most of the characters, but also of Ray when he first had the idea for the series. Several years had passed since then, more than he would care to remember, but Ray was thankful that he could still identify with the spirit and unique sense of hope which seemed to inhabit the young. When everything is still possible in life, Age might bring wisdom and experience, but also a degree of cynicism on what might still be possible to be achieved, causing so many to give up on the pursuit of a dream. Ray had long dreamed of bringing this series to fruition. In a surreal way, he felt he was still about the same age, caught up by the sheer enthusiasm from all the young cast when he welcomed them and their families to the meet and greet party. This was a regular event at Cloud9 before filming began, an opportunity for everyone to get together socially, for the cast and crew to be introduced, to get to know each other, and to have a tour of the studio facilities. And there was also so many questions, an undercurrent of nervous energy, a collective consciousness of excited anticipation. It was always the same before starting a new production, like the countdown to Christmas, or starting a new school or a new job, or preparing to go on holiday, wondering what adventures might lay in store along the way. This time, though, Ray had noticed an additional element. It was as if the theme of the series was transcending, and the young cast were also about to embark upon a quest to build a better world, though the tenets of that ideal were in reality in the hands of all the young, being the true life force of shaping the future since time began. Parents welcomed the open forum so that they would become familiar with all the surroundings and could meet the chaperones, house parents of the particular cast houses where their child would be staying, along with the applicable tutors of the Cloud9 school. And in some ways, it was as if the young cast were being sent away for 6 months to boarding school. Now, after all the anticipation, the reality would have set in. The production of any series involved such a grueling schedule. Ray hoped all were coping with the workload, but perhaps was overly concerned due to the fact that he himself was struggling to keep on top of all the tasks he had in hand. He would only be away for about 10 days, but felt strangely anguished by the separation, almost as a mother might feel having given birth. And although bringing a new production to the screen was in no way as profound, it evoked a similar sense of protectiveness. After all, Ray had been carrying his creative baby for over 25 years, hoping but always wondering if it would ever be born. As well as making notes on the new series, he also wanted to review territories which were open on past productions, and which would be available to license at the festival. Also to ensure that key buyers were on the invitation list for the Twist in the Tail press conference. He always found it difficult to keep all the plates of all the Cloud9 titles in the portfolio spinning. More product bought more plates. In the past 5 years, he had produced almost 140 episodes and 25 mini-movie specials. Now he had just embarked upon another 52 episodes, and was beginning to feel as if his head was spinning as well. The series with William had completed filming, and was in the closing stages of post-production. All of Ray's team in New Zealand had more or less stamped the end on that title, and were focusing on the new series which was being shot, as indeed was Ray. But although A Twist in the Tail had come to the end in production terms, it was just the start of the distribution process. That in itself was a full-time job, and he knew he was pushing the boundaries overseeing both production and distribution, let alone an international company with all the myriad of tasks that involves. "Do you think the captain would mind?" the flight attendant whispered excitedly a few hours later. Ray glanced up from his notepad. The attendant could see that he was clearly confused and whispered again in an attempt to clarify. "Do you think the captain would mind if I asked for his autograph?" "You want to ask the captain for his autograph?" Ray inquired incredulously, unable to comprehend why the attendant would want this in the first place, never mind asking Ray for permission first. "I've always been such a huge fan," she continued to enthuse in an undertone. "Captain James T. Kirk? He's such an icon. He's also fast asleep. Why don't you check when he's awake?" The flight attendant eventually obtained an autograph during breakfast, as did several other grateful fans who recognized William when he and Ray arrived at Heathrow. Ray noticed many others who just stole a few starstruck looks, but were probably too embarrassed to ask, feeling it to be an invasion of privacy. William never seemed to mind. He was always friendly and tried to make time for his fans. Ray was impressed with such a generosity of spirit. William not only possessed unique gifts as an actor, but also as a human being. He was a real gentleman. One obtrusive fan caught the sharp end of Ray's tongue, though, when he crossed the line literally, pushing and shoving, snapping away with his camera, as feverish as any paparazzi, while Ray and William tried to retrieve their luggage from the encircling belt, causing both to lose out on the chance to grab the last remaining cases, and they had to wait for what felt like an eternity for the belt to complete another cycle, which was frustrating. Ray could ill afford to lose any more time. The Los Angeles to London flight had arrived late due to headwinds, exacerbated with passport control being particularly slow. William wished Ray the best of luck for the start of the festival. They exchanged goodbyes and went their separate ways. Ray rushed flat out to the British Airways terminal, hoping he would still catch his connecting flight. If only he could have been beamed up in true Star Trek mode from New Zealand to the south of France, it would have made life so much easier, he thought, darting between the crowds of passengers. The journey was starting to feel as if it had taken forever, especially considering that he had just left spring yesterday in the southern hemisphere, while today in the northern hemisphere Europe was heading into autumn. Ray finally arrived breathlessly at the gate and presented his boarding pass, which was zipped through the automatic machine. The ground staff member checked Ray's passport, then considered him in growing intrigue. "Off to the television festival?" "Yes," replied Ray, wondering how the member of the staff knew. "Don't I know you?" "I don't think so," Ray stated quickly. He had been interviewed on television on several occasions, but being involved mostly on the other side of the camera was far from having a famous, familiar face. "I could have sworn I checked you in a few months ago, on a flight to New Zealand, was it?" "Oh, that might explain it," Ray replied. He'd lost count how many times he was travelling back and forth between London and New Zealand these days, but thought it must be becoming a little too much for airport staff to notice. And it was starting to irritate Ray, but he smiled politely, eager to obtain his passport back and board the aircraft, realising that precious seconds were ticking away. "Wish I could travel a bit more often," the lady reflected. "But then, they don't give discounts for ground staff anymore." "Very interesting," Ray said, not that interested. But then he felt guilty. He was not by nature intolerant. The lady was just being friendly. "So me and the hubby have decided to rent a caravan on the south coast." "Really? That should be nice for you both." "Ever been to the south coast?" Ray stared at the lady in mounting frustration, but contained the need to scream at her and almost begged in a great effort of self-restraint. Just give me my passport, please." "Oh, right. You can't stand around talking here all day or you'll miss the flight. Safe travels," said the lady, handing Ray back his passport. He faked a smile, then rushed down the boarding ramp, making a mental note to attempt suicide if he encountered the lady ever again in the future. There was something about her, the way she moved, even the way she spoke, that was in direct contradiction to the world Ray inhabited, as if she lived her life in slow motion. But it felt strangely appealing, as did a week away on the south coast in a caravan. He could do with a break. Ray's workload was increasing, bringing so many pressures and demands he wondered how long he could go on like this. An overwhelming sense of fatigue set in as he buckled his seatbelt for yet another flight, but was thankful that at least he had made the onwards connection. There were several flights throughout the day to Nice across all airlines departing regularly, especially with the festival occurring. But after such a long and arduous journey, Ray was determined not to elongate the trip even a minute longer than he had to. For a while, as the aircraft left the gate and taxied to the runway, he became engulfed in a profound sadness. Was his life now reduced to trying to save a minute of time? But he lifted his spirits, reflecting that it all went along with the lifestyle and career path he had chosen. No point feeling sorry for himself. He needed to get a grip. The aircraft wasn't even airborne before he had fallen into a deep sleep. As busy as Heathrow Airport had been, it was total gridlock at Nice Airport. Like the whole world had descended, which in a way it had. The world of broadcasting, that is. Delegates attended from every country. In the next few days, decisions would be made for what television programs viewers would be watching in every far-reaching corner of the globe. There were actually 2 festivals being held throughout the year. In addition to MIPCOM, convened every October, MIP was held each April, about a month before the Cannes Film Festival. In many ways, the Glittering Motion Picture Forum was very similar to its television cousin, attracting the attention of the worldwide press and general public, especially with so many stars of the small screen in attendance. This year at MIPCOM, a range of high-profile names were scheduled to appear. Ray was sure he recognized the wrestling phenomenon Hulk Hogan ahead going through passport control, and there was no mistake that he was now standing behind the Hoff in the long, slow-moving queue. They exchanged a few jet-lagged pleasantries while inching closer and closer to the customs desk, where an officious-looking and miserable officer seemed to be purposely pedantic, slowly examining travel documents, visas, and passports. Come on, Ray thought, get a move on. And he could see the slow pace was infuriating many other delegates, desperate to get settled in their hotels, rest up, and try somehow to adjust to a different time zone, let alone the busy week which lay ahead. Ray wondered what David Hasselhoff would be promoting. A remake of Knight Rider, perhaps? Or another series of Baywatch, which had enjoyed much success. But he decided not to ask. Sure, the Hoff would not be in any frame of mind to discuss it. He would probably speak of nothing else in the ensuing few days. Ray was far from interested in pursuing it anyway, realizing that it might precipitate questions about a twist in the tale which he preferred at this point not to answer. For all the camaraderie which existed within the industry, everyone always liked to remain discreet at the festivals, aware that it was, after all, a business. Every delegate attending was a colleague, some were even friends, but they were also competitors. A launch of a new program was rather like the launch of a new model of a car. No one ever wanted to dilute the impact of any press conference by leaking advanced detail. What felt like an eternity was probably no more than an hour before Ray finally managed to get into the arrivals hall to collect his luggage. Then he was met by the Cloud9 head of security and chauffeur, who would transport Ray and William when he arrived on Tuesday, between their hotel in Juan-les-Pins and the distribution stand in Cannes, where the Cumulus team were based. Good flight? They asked, wheeling the trolley laden with suitcases which were then loaded to the back of the limousine. Ray just groaned. They knew their man well enough to know that he was not exactly in a mood to be overly social. So the journey from the airport to the hotel was mostly in silence, except for the occasional question checking if Ray wanted the air conditioning on or any music to be played. Ray never considered himself to be anyone special. He always preferred to be treated just as any other member of the team. The reality was that he was different, being head of the company he had founded. But any success had not really changed him in any way, and he was amazed when people would comment when they met him that he was so down to earth, which is what Ray perceived he was. He could see, though, how some might have felt that, because Ray had thought just the same thing with William when they first met. "Hi, I'm William Shatner," he had said when he arrived in New Zealand. It was endearing that William thought he had to introduce himself, as if Ray or no one else would know who he was, and it made Ray smile and warm to William immediately. He was a legend to many, especially Star Trek fans, but was so unassuming, with no ego or pretense. Most of the Cloud9 team were dedicated Trekkies. One waved and called out, "Beat me up, Scotty," as he passed Ray and William getting out of the car when it arrived at the studio. "How many times have you been asked that?" Ray asked, leading William to the main administrative building. "It's the first time this second," William smiled, "but that's part of the price of boldly going where no man has gone before." "Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to Cloud9, Ray said, as the automatic doors swung open and they walked into the main reception. A lot of people thought Ray and his team were out there, and he was intrigued to see what the captain of a starship would think. Thankfully, Williams seemed to enjoy his time filming the series, and all the team certainly enjoyed working with him. He was the consummate professional, and just like most, though sadly not all of the people Ray had met in the public eye, just a normal, everyday type of person. One of the benefits of being a writer or a producer was that Ray did not attract the same attention. He still had a profile, though, and for some reason any kind of celebrity made people think that someone with it was somehow different. It might make some people change, of course, especially those who had started to believe their own publicity. But Ray hadn't changed and wondered if any success had made people around him change. Maybe. Ray was pleased to be surrounded by a team who was sympathetic to the burden of all the responsibilities he had to carry, knowing that it could be a heavy load to bear at times. Some, no doubt, may have considered him to be temperamental, but most made allowances, tried to adapt to his needs, and were in tune and considerate of his moods. By nature, he was usually laid back, easygoing, except when he was tired or frustrated by any creative matter. Then Ray could be irritable, liable to erupt without any warning. So those who worked for him closely grew to learn to identify all the signs. If he wanted to talk, they would talk, but if not, it was wise to let silence prevail. "Bonjour, Monsieur Thompson," the concierge said, opening the back door of the limousine. "Good to have you back with us, sir." "It's good to be back, Savard," replied Ray as he got out of the vehicle. It felt that no time had passed since he was last a guest attending the MIP festival in April. He always preferred to stay out of town rather than in Cannes. It was so much more relaxed, and he had actually started to wind down the minute the limousine pulled into the impressive driveway of one of his favourite boutique hotels in the world, one which could rival the very best of what any hotel could offer anywhere in the world in Ray's view, the 5-star Hotel Yuana. There was no need to go through the formalities of checking in. Everything had been arranged well in advance by his assistant. And if by any chance she had missed anything, which was highly unlikely, efficiency was her middle name, Ray had been a regular client for years. All were well aware of his requirements, which had long since become a matter of routine. An ice-cold bottle of aged champagne was waiting in his hotel suite, along with a selection of canapes stylishly laid out on an antique silver platter. Ray was not a great drinker of champagne. He enjoyed an occasional glass, but even the finest varieties never really endeared him. He preferred a quality red wine, but since the first time he had discovered the hotel, a bottle of champagne glistening in an ice bucket had always been made available upon arrival. Now that had evolved into somewhat of a tradition, and Ray was never one to break with tradition. Trying to maintain it in whatever form had become habitual, an ongoing ritual that some observed could be down to more than just being a little eccentric, as if he could only find emotional stability through an almost obsessive search for continuity to satisfy a dysfunctional psychological need. Ray considered it to be no more than a harmless pursuit of routine. He just liked things to be normal. He took a shower to freshen up. That was normal after every flight. Then he sat in the chaise lounge on the balcony overlooking the Mediterranean and decided to take some time out to enjoy the picturesque view. The waves from the sea gently overlapped onto the hotel's private sandy beach, littered with palm trees, straw huts, and sunbeds. Most were unoccupied, being out of season. With the absence of many tourists, the resort felt even more appealing, tranquil. This was another normal, an attempt, or more a need to be precise, to try and slow everything down now, and then in moments of solitude in order for his mind to either wander or to process his thoughts so that Ray could organize them into some form of structure. Otherwise he would struggle. The late afternoon Côte d'Azur sun was starting to sink slowly on the distant horizon, the sky becoming ablaze with a multitude of extraordinary changing colours. He sipped on his glass of champagne, welcoming the opportunity to just switch off for a few hours before dinner with the Cumulus team, and soak up the special ambiance of the French Riviera, which today felt so strangely peaceful. But Ray knew it was the calm before the storm. In the next few days he would be caught up in a whirlwind of exhausting activity, which would leave him feeling even more drained and exhilarated if the launch of the new series went well, or devastated if it did not live up to expectations. This was the last hurdle in a long race to get product on screen before the real consumers, members of the general public, who ultimately decided the fate of any series by the use of their remote control switch. They held the sole option of what they wanted to watch, but all the buyers at the festivals had the power to decide if the international viewers would ever be given the choice. Fortunately, Cloud9 was evolving into a brand and enjoyed a growing reputation of delivering quality programming. So buyers were always keen to see new product, but it never paid to be overly confident and complacent in this industry. For all the courting and showbiz bonhomie, Ray knew in reality that everyone was only as good as their last movie or show. Beneath all the schmaltz and smiles, ratings and box office returns seemed to determine the speed at which telephone calls were returned, and what the agenda for "we must do lunch" could be. More often than not, Ray could suss out if any invitation was genuine within a matter of seconds, but was pleased that overall he enjoyed a close and meaningful relationship with most in the business, which he valued. But he had been around long enough to know that for some, an invitation to lunch could also be a superficial pleasantry to keep him sweet in case he might be needed and could deliver a product of value. Otherwise, the invitation strangely seemed to evaporate. This was an industry of when you're hot, and when you're not, you're not. That's when you discover who the genuine people really are. Those supportive not only through the good times, but the bad. When it's good, success draws so many people like bees to honey. But if the fiscal returns fade, some of those who once championed all the creative efforts like a best buddy pal seem to mysteriously disappear.